Video title: The Ghost in the Archives, the horrifying true story of Hollowest Plantation. Opening hook: midnight to 2 o'clock. Visual: slow drone shot of a Carolina landscape, golden hour. Cut to a dilapidated plantation house, overgrown. Eerie ambient music. Narrator: deep in the heart of eastern Carolina, where the tobacco fields have long since gone to seed and the Cape Fear River moves like molasses through the low country, there once stood a plantation that history tried its hardest to forget. For over a century, the true story of Hollowest Plantation existed only as a ghost, whispered in fragments, buried in archives, deliberately erased from official records. Between 1839 and 1857, 11 men simply vanished from its workforce. No inquiries were made. No church bells tolled. No one asked where they went. But then, in 1846, something was born within those decaying walls. Something that made wealthy men from 3 states ride through the night with saddlebags heavy with gold that would never appear in their account books. The child's very existence was a fortress of lies. Falsified birth records. Backdated contracts. Encrypted letters passed between the most prominent families of the South. The conspiracy held for nearly 80 years until 1923, when a courthouse fire in DePan County exposed what an entire community had sworn to bury. Visual: flames flickering over old documents. Slow zoom into a charred birth certificate. This is the story of Hollowest Plantation and the legacy of the Vance family. It is a case where the true horror lies not in what was recorded, but in what was systematically erased. Part 1, The Monument to Decline, 2 to 6 o'clock. Visual: wide shots of the plantation ruins. Panning across empty fields, peeling wallpaper inside the house. Narrator: Hollowest Plantation was a monument to decline. 470 acres of exhausted soil, a place where prosperity had bled out of the land, leaving nothing behind but debt and desperation. The house itself stood 3 stories tall, built from local cypress and brick fired right there on the property. Its windows faced east, a blessing for morning light, intended by its original builder. But by 1839, those windows only reflected the creeping neglect. Peeling paint. Crooked shutters. Gardens strangled by weeds. The master of this fading kingdom was a man named Nathaniel Vance. At 47, he carried himself with the bearing of a gentleman. His hair was always perfectly pomaded, his coat still tailored in Wilmington. But these were costumes from a past life. The tobacco that had built his family's fortune no longer grew with any vigor. The merchant bank in Wilmington held mortgages on everything: the land, the remaining enslaved people, his very future. Visual: portrait of a stern-looking 19th century man. Cut to documents with mortgage stamped across them. Nathaniel had married twice. His first wife, Catherine, died in childbirth. His second, Margaret of Charleston, brought a substantial dowry, and in the winter of 1827, a daughter named Elizabeth, born during a savage ice storm. The midwife, a free woman of color named Ruth Carver, discovered the truth within hours of the birth. The infant was blind. Nathaniel paid Ruth triple her fee and secured her silence with a threat so chilling that she never spoke of it again. Margaret Vance lasted 18 months before taking a fatal dose of laudanum. The doctor, a man named Ephraim Stokes, recorded the cause as respiratory failure. Visual: ghostly imagery of a young girl in a darkened room. Shadows. Nathaniel raised Elizabeth in near total isolation, confining her to the 2nd floor of the plantation house. Her entire world was mapped by touch and sound. Her only companion was an enslaved woman named Ada, who, in an act of quiet defiance, secretly carved raised letters into wooden blocks to teach the girl to read. Part 2, A Monstrous Calculus, 6 to 12 o'clock. Visual: dark study, candlelight. Papers scattered across a desk. Whiskey decanter. Narrator: by 1838, Nathaniel's desperation had reached its breaking point. He had sold nearly everything of value. The bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. He had perhaps 18 months before they would seize it all. His daughter, blind and unmarriageable, represented not hope but a continued drain on his dwindling resources. And so, one evening, drowning in debt and whiskey, Nathaniel Vance began searching through his father's papers. He was looking for anything, any loophole, any precedent that might save his land.
Visual, close-up on a yellowed legal document. Quill pen.
The camera zooms in on the words property classification. He found it, a complex case from 1791 concerning inheritance and property classification. He read it once, and then again, until its monstrous implication became clear. His daughter Elizabeth was free. She was white. But if she were to bear a child, and if that child's paternity were documented in a specific, fraudulent way, it could be legally classified not as his grandchild, but as property of the estate. Visual, chains appearing over an infant's silhouette.
Gold coins raining down.
In the hidden markets of the antebellum South, a light-skinned child with documented European ancestry was a premium commodity.
A child born under such unusual circumstances would be extraordinary, attracting collectors who paid in gold, not promises.
The plan was an extension of the system's own logic.
If human beings could be property, then why not his own bloodline if it saved his land? Nathaniel needed accomplices.
He wrote 3 letters.
Visual, 3 envelopes being sealed with wax.
Names appearing: Stokes, Pritchard, Harrington. The first went to Dr. Ephraim Stokes, the physician who had signed Margaret's death certificate. Stokes was widowed and deep in debt. The second went to Magistrate Calvin Pritchard, who presided over Dupin County's legal matters. Pritchard was ambitious and shackled by gambling debts. The third went to Thomas Harrington, a discreet Wilmington broker who specialized in the sale of enslaved people. Harrington understood the market for unique acquisitions.
All 3 men came. All 3 agreed.
Stokes for $500. Pritchard for $800 and the clearing of his debts. Harrington for his standard 20% commission.
The conspiracy was sealed.
Part 3, The Architecture of a Crime, 12 to 1700 hours. Visual, slow pan across the faces of enslaved men drawn, fearful.
Cut to Nathaniel reviewing them like livestock. Narrator. Nathaniel's next task was the selection of the men.
He reviewed the enslaved population of Hollowest with the cold eye of a livestock breeder. He chose 11 young, healthy, with physical traits that would make the eventual child valuable. Men like Jacob, tall and light-skinned.
Daniel, quick and intelligent.
And Isaac, a quiet, observant carpenter. They were moved to the main house, given better food and lighter work, isolated and suspicious, unaware of the role they were being forced to play. Visual, Magistrate Pritchard in his office, forging documents.
Ink blotting. False seals being pressed.
Meanwhile, Magistrate Pritchard began crafting the legal fiction. He prepared a false birth certificate for Elizabeth, backdated to 1827, which stated that she was the daughter of an enslaved woman named Sarah. This would mean that Elizabeth herself was legally enslaved, and thus, her child would be born into slavery. The real certificate was removed.
The lie was being given a legal skeleton.
Visual, Elizabeth at a dinner table, her father speaking intently, her face troubled. Elizabeth, now approaching her teenage years, was pulled from her isolation for weekly dinners, where her father spoke ominously of duty in saving the family legacy.
She understood nothing of his true intent, only a growing sense of dread.
Part 4, The Harvest of Sorrow, 17 to 2200 hours. Visual, springtime, beautiful but ominous.
The plantation awakening. But something dark is coming. Narrator. In the spring of 1845, with the bank deadline looming, Nathaniel set his plan in motion.
What followed was a systematic, calculated horror executed not in a rage, but with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. The 11 men, one by one, were forced into situations they could not refuse. Elizabeth, blind and powerless, had no means to resist her father's control.
Ada witnessed it all.
Her silence was bought with the threat of being sold to a turpentine camp, a death sentence. Visual, Elizabeth alone in her room, clutching her abdomen, terrified. Ada at her side, weeping. By July, Dr. Stokes confirmed that Elizabeth was pregnant. She spent the months that followed in her shuttered rooms, her body changing in ways that terrified her.
Ada tried to comfort her, but how could one explain such a fate?
Nathaniel treated it as a matter of accountancy, corresponding with Harrington about potential buyers, while Pritchard finalized the documents that would enslave his grandchild from its very first breath.
Visual, storm raging outside. Rain pounding the windows. A single candle flickering.
On March 4, 1846, after a grueling 20-hour labor, Elizabeth gave birth to a son.
The infant was healthy, with features that clearly showed his mixed ancestry.
When Elizabeth, broken and exhausted, asked to hold him, Nathaniel refused. The child was taken downstairs. In the study, Dr. Stokes and Magistrate Pritchard were waiting. They filled out the birth certificate.
Child born to Sarah, enslaved, deceased. Father unknown.
Property of Nathaniel Vance.
They signed it.
They affixed their seals.
The fiction was now law.
Visual, the infant being handed over. A carriage disappearing into the mist. The infant was named Thomas and given to a wet nurse. Elizabeth, recovering upstairs, would hear his cries but was never permitted to see him. Part 5, The Price of Gold, 2200 hours 26:00.
Visual, gold coins being counted. A ledger book. Names of bidders. Narrator.
Nathaniel contacted Thomas Harrington. The bidding began and quickly rose to $4,700. The buyer was Charles Rutledge, a sugar planter from Louisiana known for his collection of unusual servants. He arrived at Hollowest, examined the child with the detachment of a man appraising an animal, and paid in gold eagles and double eagles. Visual, the carriage leaving. Nathaniel at the window, counting. As Rutledge's carriage disappeared down the road, Nathaniel counted the coins. It was enough to save Hollowest.
He paid the bank the very next morning. But the conspiracy had left living witnesses, and silence is a fragile thing.
Visual, Isaac's face, haunted. A robe. A bucket kicked.
The first crack appeared when Isaac, one of the 11 men, tried to take his own life. Nathaniel had him punished and sold to Virginia.
Elizabeth retreated into a catatonic state, diagnosed by Stokes with nervous hysteria, and kept sedated with laudanum. The greatest threat came from Reverend Thomas Gaines, who had long been suspicious. He arrived unannounced one day when Nathaniel was away, and Ada, in a moment of desperate hope, let him in. Visual, the Reverend kneeling beside Elizabeth. Her thin hand reaching out. He found Elizabeth frail and medicated, but she managed to whisper fragments of the truth. Confinement. Strange men. A baby taken away. Gaines confronted Nathaniel, who coolly dismissed it as the ravings of a sick mind. The Reverend began asking discreet questions in town, but he was a minister with no power.
Magistrate Pritchard warned him off.
Stokes stood by his documents. Gaines recorded his suspicions in a private journal, but took no further action. The system protected itself. Epilogue, The Reckoning of Memory, 26:00, 30:00. Visual, the DePan County Courthouse in flames. Firefighters. Water-soaked rubble. Narrator. The truth might have rotted forever with its participants if not for the DePan County Courthouse fire of 1923. Amid the water-damaged rubble, workers found 2 birth certificates for Elizabeth Vance from 1827. One identifying her as the daughter of Nathaniel and Margaret. The other as the child of an enslaved woman named Sarah. Visual, a historian, Harold Jensen, holding up the 2 documents. His face in shock. A local historian named Harold Jensen pieced together the puzzle. The bill of sale for an infant named Thomas to Louisiana. The suspicious medical records. The timing of Nathaniel's sudden wealth. Jensen published his findings, and over time, more evidence emerged. Reverend Gaines's diary. A cache of unmailed letters written by Ada late in her life, which described the horror in painful detail. Visual, Ada's letters on aged paper. Handwriting fading. I witnessed evil that I was powerless to stop, she wrote. And that powerlessness has haunted me every day since. That child was born innocent into a system that made him property, and his own grandfather sold him for gold. Visual, Elizabeth's grave. Overgrown. A single flower.
Elizabeth Vance died in 1863. She was 36 years old, having spent 17 years medicated and broken. Nathaniel lived until 1871, dying at his desk, his account book still open before him. He never faced justice. Visual, the fates of the others, Stokes, Pritchard, Harrington, name cards falling. The fates of the conspirators were varied. The fates of the victims largely unknown. The child Thomas disappeared into the chaos of history. His life a blank page after his purchase. Visual, hollowest plantation today, a skeleton on the Carolina landscape. Slow zoom out. Sunset. Narrator. Hollowest plantation stands in ruins today, a skeleton on the Carolina landscape. The story of what happened there is more than a tale of one man's evil. It is an indictment of a system that could legally sanctify such a horror. A lesson in how the powerful can weave lies into law. And a haunting reminder that the deepest terrors are not supernatural, but human. Forged in the cruel calculus of greed. Preserved in the silence of the complicit. And uncovered at last, in the ashes of a courthouse fire. Visual, fade to black. Title card, The Ghost in the Archives. Text, some truths cannot be burned. Narrator. Some truths cannot be burned. End credits.